Hello and welcome back to Fuel the Flames. I'm your host, Brian, also known as Malorian, and this is the show coming to you from Field of Fire that is trying to take that spark, that love that you have for the hobby, and trying to build it up into an inferno. Now, we're going to be continuing on with our 101 series, which is really getting into some of the different aspects of the hobby. And today, the one we're going to be getting into is Terrain Building 101. So again, this is supposed to be the first step. So for people that were like, oh, I didn't know that this is a hobby, or maybe those who knew about it but didn't know how to really get into it. And then later on, we'll be having episodes where we talk about more of the advanced techniques. So let's get into it. So this is a hobby, right? You might not even realize, if you're a person who's used to playing a game that's just on the computer, you're like, well, what are you talking about? It's just all on there. But even if you're a person that you do modeling, right? That is the type of game that you do, tabletop wargaming, but maybe you normally just use, some flat pieces or something like that. Well, there's a whole world to terrain building. I think I always was kind of taking it for granted when I got into the game. When I got into eventually, well, to start off with 40K, there was a lot of terrain already existing. A lot of people that had been into this game for a long time, and they just had stuff available. All these buildings and ruins and this and that, and some of them are better made than others, but they were there, and I just was able to use them. It wasn't really until I saw people playing Flames of War, that's kind of like the World War II version game of tanks and stuff, where I saw them building this city, and it is just a full city. They had everything to doing the roads, the fences, the bushes, the different houses, all the signs, every little detail. You look at this and you think like, oh my, like this is a recreation of an actual type town, but no, it's something they just kind of put together for this one battle that they're doing just then. But it took all that work to have those pieces so you can actually build this. And I think that's what I wanted to get to, is the reason why you would want to be doing this as a hobby. And the reason is immersion. It's one thing to say like, oh, I got this model here, I built it and I even primed it and I'm going to put it down on there. But it's one thing to say, this is my model, this has these rules, let's roll and see what happens. And quite another to have the story, the immersion that this is going to be my Cygnar forces going into battle against the evil Infernals. We're meeting them on the plains here. There's rubble over here and skeletons and this and that. We're going to claim these things. And all of a sudden, when things look right, when it's like you're looking at it and the models are painted, we talked about that before, but the battlefield is there, right? The place is there. It's one thing to have models looking great, but if you just put them on a regular table, it still kind of gets you out of it. It's like, oh yeah, I mean, there's where I spilled the coffee, and yeah, there's that chip over there from when I, dropped my cup the other day. Like, it kind of takes you out of the game that you're actually trying to enjoy. So it's all about that immersion. And the better it is, the more you can get into it. However, it's even a step further, because we can be saying that, okay, this is something that supplements tabletop wargaming, but this can be something all by itself. And what that really means is that you can be into terrain building just for terrain building. And I know lots of people like that's what they like to do. They like to build houses, they like to be building castles, they like to do the waterworks so they can be making streams and then bridges to put on top of it. And it's not to be playing with any game. They just like the art of building it. And then they learn from time to time, like, this worked well, but I think it'd look more realistic if I did this. Or, you know what? I've been trying to think how to do like a cool torch glow effect. I'm going to make this so I can have a torch in it and the glow's going to be on there. And I'm going to be building this. Like, that part of it is something they enjoy separate from using it in any sort of game. And obviously, it always works great when these two groups can work together, right? When you have one side that says, I just want to build terrain, and you have another group that says, I just want to play games, and it'd be cool if it was had like great terrain, and like, okay, great, let's just make this thing happen. When you have that coming together, it's wonderful. But either way, we're talking about today about terrain building. We've already discussed why you might get into it, but how do you get into it? And I think the very first thing you should do, just like with any of these 101s, is don't look too far down this road. Know that this hobby, like any one you might take on, is a path where you're going to be starting at one spot and then there's a final goal at the end, but you're not going to jump there. This is a journey that you're going to be taking to get there. Now, when you look at terrain, you could be looking at that Flames of War table where it's a full city with all these details, but scale those things back. When you're first getting into it, think about what's the type of terrain you even want to build. Do you care about making complex cities with all these things? Or do you want to maybe start with like, I just really want to make some buildings for this game, or maybe, like I'm doing this for a Christmas display, and so I'm going to be making this terrain so I can actually be doing this Christmas display. Whatever it's for, kind of focus on what the thing is that you want to be doing first. And as you do that, realize that there's even gradients to that. Let's even just think of a house. If you want to be building a house, terrain could be, I'm going to go and find a topographical picture where somebody took a picture going down on top of a city, a town, whatever, and then I'm going to blow it up to the right size and I'm going to cut it out. And I'm going to put it on the table. That could be your terrain, right? That's obviously not very, high tech or anything, but you literally just made terrain that's definitely better than having not that, right? You look at it and you're like, oh yeah, there's a building. You could do the same thing with, trees or whatever else. That's what 2D terrain is, right? Whether it's something you cut out or whether it's something that you get kind of stamped onto like a mouse pad material, that's 2D terrain. And that's a whole separate art. The 3D and 2D terrain people might be, not the best of friends sometimes, but they're both completely valid. And if it's something you enjoy, we're never here to yuck your yum. Now, if that's something that you want to start with because it's easy or it's what you actually want to do, that's great. Just think about what would things look like. Do I actually want it to look like so it's coming straight down or at an angle so I can get a better detail? And then boom, just make it on that 2D terrain and then you can start putting those down. That's a very easy first way to go. Even with what I just said there, the angles of how you're going to be looking at things gets you already in the idea of thinking about the details, right? When I think about just a house going straight down, it's like, okay, well, there's going to be basically a rectangle and I'll see the roof component and that's kind of it. But when I start thinking about what angle is it going to be going at, that's when I have to really understand the structure, right? Well, how am I going to be building this? Is it going to be a flat roof? Is it going to be slanted? Is there going to be a chimney? How far are the walls going to be inset? How many stories are there? For the windows, where are they going to be located? What makes sense? Should they actually be more detailed and like sticking out? How would I actually build a balcony? And I think that's a good way then, that when you're thinking of these things, then going from top down to an angle, that gets your mind thinking to how you might actually be building them in 3D. And even then, even when it comes to building them in 3D, we talked about taking pictures for 2D terrain, but you could be taking pictures for 3D terrain. Again, you're probably thinking too far down the line. You're thinking, I'm going to need like balsa wood and all these ceramics, and I got to build all these pieces and glue it together. It does not need to be that complicated. Imagine again, you have the picture coming down from the roof at this way, from this way. I'm seeing this wall, that wall, this wall, that wall. And what I really do then is I take some cardboard and I just glue them together in a shape, glue the pictures on top. There's nothing wrong with that. You might think like, oh, well, that's kind of cheating. It's just cardboard and paper. Yes. So again, this is something where it all depends what you're trying to get at it. When you're looking at the table, awesome. It now looks like a house. Doesn't matter which way I look at it. All the real details are there. That immersion's in there. It's everything you're trying to get. So think about your objectives. What were you trying to get from this? And that might be something that meets it completely. Or, again, it might be something that takes you down this journey as you learn to make terrain. We already talked about step from 2D to 3D. Now we're doing the cardboard with the pictures on top. Well, what if we go even further? Like that was something. I got the body together, but you know, like this one here I wanted to make was going to have a chimney. So, you know, it doesn't really work. I have to add this extra piece now. Or, you know what, you know, it's nice to have that building, but I need to do a fence now. So I'm going to have this fence coming off of it over here, and I'll have to build that separate. All of a sudden, these are details that you're starting to add to this. And each of these details are its own skill and its own labor of love, right? The idea of making this chimney could be something as simple as, again, just like a cardboard base, again, trying to figure out the right slant so it sits on the the roof right. It doesn't like go off at a weird angle, put on the pictures, you're done. Or maybe you're thinking, now that we're at the top here, okay, the rest of the house was cardboard and paper, but this, I'm actually going to go and start doing some brickwork and stuff like that and build it up myself, just so it kind of looks a little bit more right, you know, when you have that thickness looking down from the top. And that's how you get into it. That's how you have those details, and you're getting further and further into these things. Now, as you get further into these things, the cost does not need to skyrocket. You might think that, oh, I'm going to have to start getting into molding to make all these pieces, or I'm going to buy these specific pieces so I can have the right details on there. It does not need to be like that whatsoever. I mean, one of the biggest pieces of terrain I ever made was a full trench board. It had 3 pieces that were all 2x4, and then they could actually be set up in either way. That didn't matter what orientation they were. It was a trench warfare where there was trenches on across one 6-foot end and across the other 6-foot end, and even though they kind of like crisscrossed, they all met at the intersection. So it didn't matter which way you aligned it, it all went together. That was one way of thinking, but the biggest thing was the cost. Sure, I needed to get like the insulation boards, so I had the base for that. That was like $40 a sheet, but nothing too bad for how big it was. And then how am I going to build the things on it? Well, I can cut out the things for the trenches. That's pretty easy, just to have holes there. And then how am I going to make it look like there's the wood planks and all those things? Go to the dollar store and pick up some popsicle sticks. You don't need to go to a hobby store and buy the super high-end things. There's a lot of things out there that are low-end and very cheap. You know, you take some simple little popsicle sticks, you put on a wash on that, well, it is wood, so it's going to look like wood. And then all of a sudden I can use those, cutting them into the right segments to put them around there. Well, what about the top there? What about there where I'm trying to make it look like this battlefield and all these things? Well, do you live by a park? Go get some sand. Or if you don't want to steal sand, because, you know, it is stealing, well, just go off there. It's just like when we were talking about basing last time. Go buy a bag of sand. It is super cheap. Go buy a big, huge, thick bottle of white glue. Still super cheap. Mix it up, mold it however you want, and then put that onto the battlefield. If you want areas to be relatively flat, make them flat. If you want areas so that's like, oh, this will be a big crater, well, then mold it into a crater. And then if you want to add extra details, you know what? This is the biggest thing that you should learn for terrain people. If you're looking for those extra details, like, oh, I want to sprinkle around like some weapons here and a helmet here and stuff like that, you could go over and you could go to hobby stores and you could buy packs for these. I always try and tell people, work with the other hobbies. All the people out there that are the hobby builders and the converters, these people literally have buckets full of pieces. And if you tell them like, oh, you know, I was really hoping you could do me a favor and maybe give me like 5 skulls and maybe 2 guns, they'll be like, oh, you know what? I don't have time to count them out here. Here's like 100. Go ahead. You know, like they have so many of these. And if you just work together, they might be like, well, I'll give you $2 for it. Like, yeah, sure, whatever. I got lots. Get them out of here. I do GW games. Everything comes with 1,000 skulls. I'm okay. So, you know, if you work with these people, you can keep the price down and you can make it very simple and very cost effective. Even when I'm going as big as that was, making this massive board. Now, that being said, there's always room to move past that, right? If you want to start like, oh, well, I can get these things, but I want to do something very specific. Well, then you can start thinking about how you're going to be building that by yourself. Maybe you're trying to think now like, okay, well, I want to do this on this building, but you know what? That cardboard and paper base, it's just not doing it anymore. It's not strong enough for what I need to do. Or over time, it starts warping or whatever. So now you're going to start building it out of other materials. This type of thing is where that journey is going to lead you. All these different little details are going to have, like I said, its own skill sets. And each one of those is basically like a journey without a journey, all combining together to these works of art. You really have to think of it that way, that when you build that building or you build this little forest or whatever it is, that is a work of art. It is something that you took the time to think, I want to be creating this. I want it to look this way. And I use these techniques to make this happen. And that's literally what an actual artist does with a painting. So take pride in it. We always try and tell you to take passion in your hobby. And if you do that, if you don't put yourself down and be like, oh, well, I made a house, but it's just like 2D terrain, or, you know, I made this little like barn, but I mean, it's really just cardboard with paper on it. It's really trash. No, don't put yourself down. Get into it. Find how easy and cheap it is. And then within no time at all, you're going to have all the skill sets to be just making it look better and better and better. And like we said before, then all of a sudden everybody wants to be your friend, because everybody else that does stuff with terrain is like, wow, you know who has great terrain? That person. Did you hear that they made it themselves? Oh, yeah, that's awesome. You know what? I had this cool idea. I want to talk to them. Maybe I could actually like pay them to make some terrain for me. Cha-ching, it's starting to turn into something. So there you go. That's the 101 about getting into terrain building. It really is a hobby and something that we should all be, you know, giving credit to and respecting, because it is definitely an art and very, very rewarding once you get into it, and a fun journey along the way. So there you have it. Thanks for listening. We're going to be coming back with these every 2 weeks, so I can't wait to see you next week. Bye.